2, 3, 4.
Sometimes we need to slow it down. Take a look around and breathe. 'Cause these times go by so very fast. Moments never last. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Quiet, be still, don't shout. Love is what it's all about. Breathe. Sometimes when you feel you've had enough, living is just too tough. Just breathe. 'Cause you'll regret when these days are past. Your friend just seen your last. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Quiet, be still, don't shout. Love is what it's all about. Just breathe.
Because I am. I'm just like this is You're having way too much fun.
Mute your mics,
Are you
please.
recording video?
Love is what it's all about. Be quiet, be still, don't shout. Just breathe. Just love. Just love. Just love.
Just love.
Good evening and welcome to the Just Love Show. I got to remember to make sure everyone knows to mute their mics when the song's playing. I always forget to tell people that. Welcome to the Just Love Show. I'm so happy to have everyone here tonight. Thank you for joining me again like we do every show. Take a big deep breath and look around you. Think about all the things you've got to be thankful for. I have some wonderful guests that have grown to be dear friends over the past few months. As we've been putting together this event up in Washington called Hempapalooza. Yes, it's another hemp and cannabis show. Before I read my little passage I read every show, I want to talk a little bit about why or how I got involved with the whole hemp cannabis movement, because it certainly wasn't part of my life plan. So I'm a film and television producer, amongst other things, and when I started looking for interesting subject matter, I had a friend of mine who had Lyme disease, and he was using cannabis as a way to deal with a lot of the symptoms of Lyme disease. And I went with him for the first time to a dispensary as his caretaker. And I was just blown away. I'm like, wow, so this is what's happened since '96 in Proposition 215 here in California. We found kind of a legal way to get high, and yeah, people get some relief for, their pain and stuff, and I'm sure it's really good for that. But that was about, the limit of my understanding as far as where the movement was and the history of the plant. And then as I got more involved with the next couple months and really started seeing what was going on with the dispensaries and medicinal cannabis use, I became kind of curious. I'm like, wow, this is a story that needs to be told, especially as the raids started happening here in California. And it kept coming back to me. It's like, are we still making a big deal about this stupid little plant that my dad grew in our basement when I was a kid? Well, then after I started getting involved with I met a guy in Vallejo named Matt Shotwell who had this dispensary, and real interesting guy. He's a Cal Maritime graduate, traveled the world as a merchant marine officer, had the highest security clearance you could have with the government, and then both his sister and father got cancer, and he started sending them weed from California to deal with the effects of the chemo. Well, he's also a really motivated entrepreneur, and he goes, hey, this looks like a good way to make some money. And so here's this guy in Vallejo, which is bankrupt at this time. I'm going, let's do a show together. So we both agreed that this would be a good story. He'd be a great character. And so we started developing what would later become Weed Country, which, was aired on Discovery a couple years ago originally, but now it's really taking on full cult status. as they play in continual rerun as the momentum towards ending prohibition picks up. But what also happened to me along the way was that I saw the real good it was doing in people's lives. I did 6 hours of interviews with senior citizens who'd gotten off pharmaceuticals entirely and had the quality of life turned around. One person was an Olympic boxer who had swore it cured his inoperable cancer, or at the very least, it gave him quality of life enough so that he could spend time with his son and enjoy things while he was going through his treatments, which is 90% of getting well is state of mind. And then another lady who was Catholic high school, 2 different schools in Oakland, would have had her sons thrown in jail. She got put on 9 different pharmaceuticals in her 50s and became completely bedridden and finally said, I've had enough. She knew her son was a little bit involved with what was going on in Oakland with medicinal cannabis in Oaksterdam and Harborside and blah, blah, blah. And she started looking at this, and she quit all her pharmaceuticals. She's in perfect health. She's now 67 years old. She uses a little tincture under her tongue when she's parasailing. Then I started really looking at the history of all the uses of hemp. And I realized that this plant's, it's one of the 4 oldest plants that the human body actually has a direct physical connection with. In fact, even in women who've never used cannabis in their entire life, there's cannabinoids in breast milk. But the original cultivation of cannabis started in India 15,000 years ago. It was used in all the sacred anointing oils through Jesus' time up until a pope in the 1400s said it's got to go out, and if you use it, you're going to be burned at the stake as a witch. But that was at the same time opium and alcohol was on the rise. Hey, much easier to control people through those addictions. Up until when this country was founded, almost all of our founding fathers, which we love to, all the people who are opposed to cannabis on the far right, or even a lot of people on the left still haven't got their heads out of their proverbial butts on this issue, to realize that these same founding fathers that wrote our Constitution echoed and screamed the virtues of hemp throughout history, saying that it was a necessity to the success and security of this country. You could even pay your taxes in hemp. The godfather of our modern industrial production, Henry Ford, built an entire car out of hemp in 1941, and the people that started the prohibition, the Rockefellers, the Hearst, the DuPonts, it went to him and said, if you take this car to market, we will crush you. It was made entirely out of hemp. It ran on hemp oil. And most of the Model T's door panels were all made out of hemp. So I went, oh my God, all the trees we would have saved, all the pollution we would have saved had we not been using petroleum all this time. Jack Herer had it right. This plant can literally save the world. And all of a sudden, and I was doing I was starting with the Just Love movement then as well. And these things sort of happened for me simultaneously. And I started seeing the parallels between love and all the panacea of goodness that it can be when perceived of, and its intent and the intention placed on it allows you to have the ideal of experience of love that you want to have. It's the same thing with this hemp plant. Oh my God, it cleans the soil, revitalizes the ozone layer, cleans the atmosphere, and guess what? Can create an entire new economic structure for the entire planet because you can plant it, grow it anywhere. Then you have your fiber for clothes, paper, whatever, your nutrition from one of the best oils you can possibly consume, the easiest to consume protein for the human body, and on and on and on. So these things started to very much be parallel paths for me as far as passion to ultimately, hopefully alter humanity's current experience to one from that, not making a judgment of good or evil, right or wrong, but just one that is workable towards a sustainable future, which is supposedly what we all want. If in fact that is what we want, the things we are currently doing and the way we've been doing them, especially for the last couple of 100 years, are not workable towards that goal, towards a sustainable future for generations to come. A foundation built on the qualities of love that we seek, empathy, compassion, unity, oneness, connection with nature, all of these things combined with this amazing plant that reconnects us with nature in every conceivable way and makes us look at all the other abundance that is bestowed upon us and blessed upon us on this planet. they start to mirror one another, and I'm like, I'm down with this fight, and I'm going to make this happen on a global scale if I can. I'm going to do really devote my life to this, and it in so many ways, this silly little plant that I got in trouble so much in high school for, this thing can really save the world. And it's just phenomenal how just a changing of perception manifests an entirely different experience about something. So before I get to my guess, I'm going to read like I do. And I picked this because it really talks about us coming back to unity with the planet, which again, cannabis and hemp really will play a large part in that happening for us. It's not exactly told through that story, but you will. And the quote I used tonight is from one of my favorite authors, Douglas Adams, who wrote about the human experience from such a place of poetic absurdity that sometimes his brilliance is overlooked, but I think you'll see it in this quote tonight. So this is what I wrote. The dolphins are crying out in love to humanity. Adapt your vibration. Remember how to be, how to sing and keep time with the song of one. Come back to harmony, rhythm, or destroy all this experience is. And then the quote from Douglas Adams goes something like this. The deep roar of the ocean, the break of the waves on the farther shores and thought can find, the silent thunders of the deep. And from among it, voices calling, and yet not voices, humming, trillings, wordlings, and half-articulated songs of thought. Greetings, waves of greetings, sliding back down into the inarticulate, words breaking together. A crash of sorrow on the shores of earth. Waves of joy on where? A world indescribably found, indescribably arrived at, indescribably wet. A song of water. A fugue of voices now, clamoring explanations of a disaster unavertible, a world to be destroyed, a surge of helplessness, a spasm of despair, a dying fall, again the break of words. And then a fling of hope, the finding of a shadow earth and the implications of enfolded time, submerged dimensions, the pull of parallels, the deep pull, the spin of will, the hurl and spilt of it, the fight, a new earth pulled into replacement, the dolphins gone. Then stunningly, in a single voice, quite clear, this bowl was brought to you by the Campaign to Save Humans. We bid you farewell. And then the sound of a long, heavily, perfectly gray bodies rolling away into the unfathomable deep, quietly giggling. And without further ado, I would like to bring my guests onto the show, Nathan Pritchett and Nicole Black, who own the land we're going to be doing Hempapalooza on this summer and are the brilliant minds behind it. And I'm really looking forward to having them share their wonderful story and all that they've done and how this plant's affected their life. So welcome to the Just Love Show, my friends.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going, Kev?
It's going great. How are you guys doing tonight?
Doing great. Those were some real neat poems. I appreciate that.
Oh, thanks, Nathan. I know as an attorney you have to be kind of a wordsmith yourself, so so you get to play around with those syllables now and then.
Yeah, I've always appreciated the ability of a poet to put some words together that really don't resemble English or a sentence or anything, but you create value out of it. You put something together that makes sense in a way that's beyond those kind of rules. And being an attorney is actually a little similar to that. Sometimes you have to remind people what their real priorities are. You have to remind them what their job is and what their goals are and what they're supposed to be doing. And that's so commonly misunderstood that it actually does come up a little more often than most people would think.
Well, I'd like to, I want to get back to you, Nathan, and share your story, but I want to start with Nicole, because she has a really moving history with how she came to be involved with hemp and cannabis. But let's start before what led you into being involved with the plant. You know, were you, what was your earliest dealings with cannabis? When did you first smoke pot? When did you first have any interaction with the plant?
Well, I thought marijuana was bad. It was a drug. I was
Surprise.
Raised in the, I know, right? I was raised the daughter of a warrant officer in the military, And I was a good girl. I wore bows in my hair and did everything I was supposed to do, and I didn't touch marijuana or alcohol or anything of that sort because I wasn't raised that way. So I was adamant about being a good girl. So, but then when I was 26, I was married at the time, and my then husband had an affection for guns, particularly Glocks. So well, long story short, he took a gun to the range, he brought it home. And he didn't really realize that it had a bullet in it. But long story short, he was firing it because he thought it was jammed, or he thought there was an empty casing in it. And he said, it won't fire, see, it won't fire. And he's pulling the trigger, and I don't know this. I was a horse girl. So next thing I know, the gun went off, and I was sitting on the floor, and the gun was pointed at my kneecap. So it was point blank at my kneecap when it discharged, and I screamed because I think you do. It was a hollow point. The bullet in the gun in the chamber was a hollow point. So essentially, it went in above my kneecap, went right at my kneecap, hit the femur, ricocheted, and spiraled down my femoral popliteal artery, where then it blew out in my calf. But if you know what a hollow point is, you know that it blows a plate-sized hole in its exit wound, or its exit hole. So it pretty much annihilated my calf. I immediately went, obviously to the ambulance, and then to a helicopter, and then into surgery, where they told me ahead of time, we can't save your leg, it's going to be amputated. And I just kind of agreed, because you don't really know what else to do, so you just lay there and you go, okay, and you just go into surgery thinking you're not going to have a leg when you wake up. But it just so happens that there was a fantastic vascular surgeon on staff that night at Geisinger Medical Center in Pennsylvania, and he was able to conduct an arterial bypass. This was in 1996. The bypass surgery was a little bit more archaic than what it is now. But the damage to my leg was significant. The amount of time I had to spend without the blood, my foot had significant damage. And ultimately, when I was discharged about 6 weeks later, 9 surgeries later, and a pretty bleak prognosis, they sent me home with my bag of pills. And because I was a military girl, I didn't really do pills. I hadn't even taken Excedrin at that point. I was just kind of a easygoing, I didn't even drink. So I get discharged with a bottle of pills, and to which I didn't realize at the time that one of those pills was called methadone. And I didn't understand what it was. I just knew that when I took it, the pain went away. And little by little, I tried to recover and went into physical therapy. And I was on those pills for about 2 months when I inadvertently lost the bottle because I wasn't used to taking medication. And within about, 12 hours, I guess missing my next dose, I went into what I now know was withdrawals, full withdrawals from methadone. And I didn't know what it was. I personally thought I was having a nervous breakdown, which is what I told the doctors when they told me this is, you're withdrawing from methadone, and this is when, you lay in your vomit, you shake, you cry, you're sweating, you can't stand up, you fall down. It's a horrible, horrible experience to go through. And when I finally saw the counselor who had been talking to me after the shooting, and he said, Nicole, I said, I'm having a nervous breakdown, you guys. Leave me alone. This isn't about pills. I've had my leg blown off. My entire life is different. Leave me alone to have the nervous breakdown I deserve. And I was perfectly adamant and convinced that I was right. And then and so I agreed when my doctor said, well, if that's the case, after we give you this medication, you will feel exactly the same way. You're darn right I will. I was adamant. And then they gave me the meds, and within about 5 minutes, I jumped up off the bed, said, hey, let's go out and have dinner, and scared the crap out of myself and realized that, A, they were right, and B, I never wanted to take anything that had that kind of control over me again. So,
wow. It's funny. I just was reading today, Indiana is having a huge problem with AIDS. And a lot of it's because of, the one story I was reading was about a woman who had broken her back, and they put her on OxyContin. And when she was, couldn't get it anymore, then she was buying pills off the street, and then she turned to heroin. And most of the AIDS cases that they're having in Indiana and other places that you don't normally, connect with AIDS are coming from people who get addicted to prescription painkillers, and then once they're addicted, nobody wants to give it to them anymore. Then they turn to the streets and buy heroin, and this is what we're reaping from this, insane addiction to our pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, no, exactly. The cycle is so unfair because I had no idea what was wrong with me. I legitimately had no idea and said it to all of the doctors and fought them adamantly while, of course, going through these withdrawals. And it's incredibly undignified. You throw up, you fall down, you're lying, and you sweat, you cry. There's just really no way to express and describe it and understand how then to get away from it. And my doctor, I was adamant about not ever having something like that control me. But then I was stuck with the alternative of, well, you have this mangled leg. What do you want to do with it? And I was crying in pain, and I went through for about a year after I got off of the methadone, and I don't know, maybe 2 more years later. So I was just about 30 when my dad says to me, you should smoke some weed, honey. And I was like, Dad, my dad, who had by then retired because, of course, he was a warrant officer in the military, and again, as I said, we didn't have anything to do with it. I got mad at him for telling me to do drugs. Dad, how could you tell me that? I mean, I got adamant. I had no idea. I really didn't understand. Well, you succumb because you choose, I don't want the pills. I was terrified of what they would do, and so ultimately I did use the cannabis, and I was floored. I was dumbfounded. And then I was mad because I was like, wait a minute. Why are these pharmaceutical, why are these drugs okay? Why are these legal and this marijuana is illegal? It bothered me to my core. It conflicted greatly with my sense of right, wrong, and justice. It just didn't make sense. So ultimately I decided to start researching this dichotomy, for lack of a better word, and ended up going back to school late in life. So I was about 30 when I used marijuana the first time, and I was 33 when I entered college to start my quest to go to law school, because I needed to answer this question, and I thought law school was the answer. And so then I began the search for the policy answer, and did my bachelor's degree in public policy with a minor in political philosophy, and then my master's in public administration. And now I'm working on my law degree, and I have concluded, the long story short is the pharmaceutical industry has a lot more money in the lobby than the marijuana industry, although that gap may be closed. One aspect of your story I find, a lot, I'm cringing in pain just listening to you share your story, but I struggled with addiction in my life. I was a heavy drinker for a long time, and it was about 7 years ago that I just said enough. But I've got 4 ruptured discs in my back, and there was a period of time where they had me on 56 Vicodin, 40 Loratab, and 30 Valium a week. And that went on for about 2 years. And then I just said enough of this, because then they wanted to put me in a pain management program. So I've studied addiction, and it's just to empower myself, basically, when I was deciding that enough for me. I've never heard an addiction story of someone being addicted and not knowing that they were addicted, like not going, wow, I need that pill, I'm really wanting to get high. Usually the common school of thought is that when you're needing a pain medicine, including opiates, that you don't become addicted to them. So I don't think I've ever heard a story where someone didn't know they were addicted and were completely surprised when they stopped taking the medicine that they were going through withdrawals and didn't even know what the withdrawals were. That's a really interesting story, part of your story. It is. And what I learned, of course, obviously, I was 26 when I got shot. And just very naive about this discussion. What I now understand it as a chemical addiction. there is a distinction between psychological addictions and chemical addictions.
Mm-hmm.
So because I was given it strictly for pain when I discharged from the hospital, you don't really know what to expect. I mean, I have this huge injury, this very bleak prognosis about being able to keep my leg and having children and being able to walk, and there was just all this stuff. So I didn't really know what to think. I just took my pills and went home, and you deal with it tomorrow, basically. And so when I talked to the doctors, I had no interest in taking my pill. I didn't care that I lost the bottle. I was like, I wonder how my leg will feel. I was more curious about how my pain level would be without the meds than I was about wanting the meds. So when the withdrawals began, it was just jitters, and just my feet just started jittering. But I was on 20 milligrams twice a day, so 40 milligrams a day, and some people have had a whole lot more, and some people have had less. But that was enough to send my body into a full chemical withdrawal.
That is really fascinating because, again, the school of thought, even with chemical dependency, is that while your body's needing it for whatever you're being treated for, usually you don't get that addiction. And I'm wondering, because, like you said, you hadn't drank or really done anything in your whole life. I'm wondering if it's because your system was so pure or so clean that the addiction took hold on a chemical level that strong, that that you didn't even notice it. Obviously, you weren't aware it was happening. That's a very unusual story. It really is. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know if any doctor, while you were going through that, said, "Well, this is kind of unusual. We have somebody going through withdrawals that doesn't know they were addicted."
Yeah, well, they understood that when I arrived at the emergency room with my then husband, then took me to the emergency room and explained that I had lost the pills, and he understood more than I did at the time. Again, I was arguing, saying, "I'm having a nervous breakdown. I've earned it. Leave me alone to have my nervous breakdown," was basically my very defiant response to being told that it was pills doing this to me. I really was betrayed by the pills, and it hit me to my core. I never wanted to take pills after that.
Well, and to bring it back to marijuana and its medical uses specifically, and with regards to you specifically and your story, have you had, since you've started using cannabis, there's obviously been times when you may not have had the cannabis. Have you ever had any symptoms of withdrawal?
Never. And I've gone times, I'm almost 15 years post the injury now, and I've never had any sign of a withdrawal or any sense of feeling, even if I don't have it, if I never feel edgy. I just never. I still, and I go back to the policy. Why is this okay? It doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense when I was 26, and it definitely doesn't make any more sense now that I'm a lot more educated. And I go, it doesn't make sense, because I've never felt withdrawal symptoms from marijuana.
Well, and that's one of the things as an activist that's so frustrating for me, is it doesn't make sense. And there's no, at this point, we now know the factual history of how the prohibition started. We know, just from the video we have on the Hempapalooza website from the company in South Africa called Hemporium, where they show the machine that Hearst bought in 1931 that would take the fiber off the green stalk to make it more easy for hemp to compete with cotton. We know that they bought that machine. We know they crushed it. We know that the whole propaganda behind their prohibition was completely based on a lie. We know all of this. We know the quotes from our founding fathers, and yet we continue to hold on to a policy that's completely based in a lie. And it's maddening. It really is, when so much good can be done and the resistance is still there. And I agree with you. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
The suppression of hemp and marijuana is unbelievable. It really is. The policy suppression.
So before we segue over to Nathan, and this will be a good way to segue, how much longer did you stay with the husband that shot you?
Well, I'm very loyal, so I actually tried to work it out, but there was some domestic violence there, and ultimately, about a year after I got shot, about a year to a year and a half, I finally left for good. and really didn't look back. That's when I left. I was in Maryland at the time. He was in the Army. This happened at Toby Hanna Army Depot in Pennsylvania. So I moved to Washington State in 1999 for good. I had kind of bounced back and forth, but I left him for good in 99. So it took me about 3 years still to leave him even after that. But the recovery, it's hard to explain. You're not thinking of that when you're trying to learn how to walk again and feel and use this leg. It's a completely life-altering experience. So I just realized in 99 his abuse had continued even after the shooting, which is what I've also learned in my older years, that that's very symptomatic of a abuse cycle. The abuse just gets worse, and a lot of times when I meet women today that I hear an abusive cycle, I explain to them that it does just get worse. So I ultimately left in 99 and didn't go back to the East Coast since.
Wow. And when did you meet our good Prince Nathan?
Our good Prince Nathan, I met him in 2010 in San Diego when we started law school together.
Wow. So
we sat next to each other in contract.
Before we get up to how you became now we know why you became a cannabis activist and how it's impacted your life, and we'll talk about your now physical involvement, the things that you're doing, having a dispensary next. But Nathan, why don't you give me a little bit of background on why you started down the path in law that you did, which I find really fascinating, and sort of a little bit about your history.
Well, sure. It's obviously not much similar here, but since I've met Nicole, I've sort of shifted a lot of the focus of my career towards hemp and cannabis. That wasn't an intention of mine several years ago. It's very, very different. What's happened in the economy to undermine most industries is the inability for somebody to apply for a job with a good record if they had a cannabis possession arrest or anything. Now, that didn't happen to me, but I know that happens to a lot of people. It's a problem in the entire economy, and everybody's acknowledging that now, and it ends up affecting people who even didn't have a record like that.
Even the Koch brothers.
It makes employers. Yep. And a lot of people across the economy are acknowledging that the practice of unnecessary arrests, the practice of unnecessary negative record creation and maintenance forever, and the practice of unnecessary incarceration, and the practice of administering law in a way that, is anti-public policy. These things are crippling the economy, and there's all kinds of details that are fascinating about this that affect practice of law. But what's happened, and it's a very well-known phenomenon, is there's huge legal unemployment. And there's a lot of attorneys who find work and do this and do that, but it's a changing model from, where big law firms employed a lot of people and everybody made money, and that's great. And I didn't really believe in that myth because going to law school from 2009 through 2012, Nicole and I were in the bubble on law school enrollment and tuition rising and joblessness among new grads and lack of ability to find internships. I found a really good internship. I was really fortunate to have fantastic mentors at many stages of my education and my career. As far as hemp and cannabis, that goes back to when I was a child. My first job was picking vegetables for $4 an hour. And when I was about to get my driver's license, I got a frivolous speeding ticket for like $200, and I'll never forget it. And there's all kinds of ways that this police officer was tailgating me and basically forced me to do a rolling stop at an empty intersection where I almost did the complete stop, got the rolling stop ticket. I was so angry. And from that point on, I always had this thing in the back of my mind that if I ever got a cannabis possession ticket, it would probably put me in an underclass of people who now, for the rest of their lives, would have this impossibility of explaining to somebody who they were asking for a job, oh my God, I'm so sorry that one time I smoked some pot and now I'm all better. And I went to treatment and all these other garbage stories that we invent because we have all this propaganda that we have to live in. And so what I'm real fortunate for is that nowadays the propaganda is collapsing. People's attitudes are just not going to take this profit-generating law enforcement model anymore. And it's unfortunate that it took so many tragic events, you know, in many parts of the country, many different ways. But that's kind of where we're at. So my background was more in agriculture and science and biotech and other things. But hemp and cannabis is something that fits my skills and my goals more than most industries right now.
You know, and that's something I want to circle back a little bit, because even in this conversation, we tend to want to explain why cannabis is good and all the good things about it, and why people have a completely wrong impression of the plant. And I think at this point, we've been meeting with the people, the heads of the Reform CA movement, which we actually have Jim Trippey involved down here, who wrote the algorithm for Howard Dean's campaign and Obama's campaign. And what we're finding as we're doing surveys is the message that's really going to resonate with people is a word you touched on: economy. And one thing that, you know, while we were going through the raids at Greenwell and everything that took place when we were putting Weed Country together, a part of that story that was completely lost was the fact that Greenwell employed 15 people. And when that raid in a bankrupt city took place, there were 15 people that couldn't find employment. 2 of them ended up homeless. So I think changing this conversation to talk about the economic impact that this commodity, when I really do like to start referring to it as not a singular industry, not even a singular movement, but the reestablishment of maybe the most valuable commodity in human history. And really focusing on the economic aspects of it, I think, is really important as we move beyond prohibition. And I think that conversation has to start now, so I'm glad you brought it up. Mm-hmm. And sort of refocused it. So how did you meet Nicole? I mean, you met her at law school, and
yeah, the very beginning of law school, in the back of the room at class. Our law school was a fascinating place, and we had a good time.
I sat next to him in contract,
mm-hmm.
and I don't know. We became very good friends, and we started to realize that we had a lot of similar ideas in terms of policy and law, and I had shared the same story I shared with you tonight. And I think that he's definitely kind of taken this whole, especially since we started the dispensary, seeing how it actually plays out on other people's lives, not just, you know, your own story is one thing, but now I see how it impacts other people's lives. So I think that we've kind of taken this to a whole nother level, obviously, because we're here talking to you about Hempapalooza.
Well, and
the
then
only way that's possible.
I'm sorry, go on, Nathan. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Oh, I was just going to say that the only way that that's possible is because there's so many people who are in the movement and who have made this happen long before me and long before Nicole, and you know, it's kind of reached such a critical mass, you know, that we've been able to operate a very small business in a very small town and do a lot of good things in a very small scale. But it's so encouraging that this is about to become a mainstream, rational system.
Well, and that's another really important thing that I'm glad you brought up. There are so many people. I mentioned Jack Hara earlier in the show, who wrote the book The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which is really sort of the cannabis movement's Bible, if you will. But there's so many people who have sacrificed so much. 2 of them we know, Paul von Hartmann, who's been on my show, has been doing this for 23 years. Roger Christie, who started the Cannabis Ministry, has also been on my show, spent 41 months in detention center in Hawaii, never seen the sun, on really no specific charges. And there's so many people still in prison today. When I was having a meeting with one of my business partners down in Arizona, and he brought up a scene from Cheech and Chong's movie. I think it was like 73 or so. And they're saying, hey, you know, man, it's like we don't have to worry about anything. By next summer, this will all be legal. and
Yeah.
and you're just going, well, next summer took a little bit longer than anyone thought, especially for Tommy. You know, he got swept up in that too. You know, 9 months in jail for Tommy Chong for not even possessing any weed, but simply getting caught in what, by any stretch of the imagination, was entrapment, but not for selling weed, for selling pipes. And spent 9 months in prison for that. And if anyone hasn't read Tommy Chong or seen Tommy Chong's movie, they should, because he left prison saying, I like the people in prison better than the people that put me there. And that's a pretty strong statement. So anyway, let's fast forward a little bit before we run out of time, which I always do. How did you guys end up in Washington, in the Olympic Peninsula, my home state, and get a dispensary going there? And what was it like going through the legalization process there? Because you guys were there while this all was happening. And what's happening now in the state as well?
Right. Well, my parents moved out here after we lived on a sailboat in Baltimore, and they went on a road trip, and they ended up staying in Washington State and bought property. So, and then my dad ultimately retired. So when I chose to go home, I really just went home to mom and dad. So it just so happens that mom and dad were here. And then Nathan came up after he finished school, and then he moved up here because he's originally from Wisconsin. And then the movement, so medical's been legal here, I think, since 98. I can't remember exactly what year it became legal, but in 99 is when I started becoming a medical cannabis patient. My dad actually, when he discovered that the marijuana would help my pain, he decided to learn how to grow it. And so he became my designee. I don't know how to grow it. I'm not a green thumb. But my dad.
I officially love your dad.
Awesome. Yeah, he did. He risked it, and because he thought that was the best way to help me get where I needed to go. I mean, we have the physical deformity that occurred, but there was also a lot of just mental. I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to leave the farm. So I didn't really start getting involved as an activist because I was still very quiet. I still was, oh my gosh, I'm doing drugs, but still angry. So as I started to go to school, that's when I became involved more. I was an intern for Judge Wickham at Thurston County Court, where we did an efficiency analysis on the court system. This is only relevant that I had to comb through stacks and stacks and stacks of cases and identify what was taking them so long to resolve. And we found two things. One, continuances was a big deal. But my own observation was in reading these cases, a lot of them were marijuana charges. And I kind of put that in my back pocket because it was such a controversial issue. Obviously didn't want to go to this judge and go, so tell me about this. Let's talk about this. Although we did ultimately have the conversation. I was too shy to mention it. I just stayed quiet. Then when I got into grad school, I had to write a paper. And I ultimately wrote a paper about taking that observation of the criminal cases that I read, and then the need for the budget deficiency that the state is suffering. And I said I thought that they should decriminalize it and turn it into a ticket. Well, now they have now officially passed it as recreational, but in doing so, and this is the part that really gets my goat. In doing so, they basically told patients that you used to be able to have 12 ounces of usable marijuana on you at any time. They've reduced that to 3 ounces. And I look at, my background in political philosophy says, I'm sorry, but that's an extension of the state that is not okay. I don't feel like the state has the right that now, because everybody can go get high and smoke weed, that they have the right to tell patients, you now can only have this much. That doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't. It's a leap in logic, in my opinion.
It's a flawed policy.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot. There's certainly more than enough of that out there for sure. So when did you open your dispensary?
We've been open a year and 3 months now. So just last year, the beginning of 2014.
And have you had any problems with law enforcement at all since you've opened?
No, not at all. In fact, we have a really small town, and every year we do what's called the Loyalty Day Parade. And I was so scared last year because the sheriff comes down, the county commissioners come down, and they all line up. And the building where our dispensary is where everybody, they all right there in that driveway and in that down that road. And I stood out there and I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and this was bad, and I can't believe it. And I just stood out there and waved and tried to talk to people, and it was awkward. I felt really uncomfortable. But the county has been great, and nobody bothered us. In fact, they wave, and we had the Loyalty Day Parade again this year, and it was even more festive than it was last year in our parking lot. So, no, we did not bring samples to the parade, which was probably one of the most frequently requested requests from people at the parade, which was kind of funny.
Well, I'm really happy and just feeling very blessed that nothing happened to you guys, because going through what we went through here in California 5-6 years ago was unbelievable. They went to Oaksterdam. Richard Lee, who's one of the leaders in this movement for many years, who founded Oaksterdam. They went and they kicked in all the doors and they punched holes in the walls, and it's like, why? The doors were open, they were unlocked, you guys could walk in. With the raid in Vallejo that we went through, they raided the dispensary, and when I say raided, we're talking full SWAT team, M16s, the whole bit. Raided Matt's home, abused his dogs. His one dog, Sativa, literally it took maybe a year before she stopped shaking. Again, with M16s, the whole bit. Same thing at his girlfriend's house. And again, all this time the doors were unlocked. All you had to do was knock and ask any questions you wanted to ask, especially after we had invited the police in the city into a grow that was going on in Vallejo that got robbed, but we had insured through Lloyd's of London, but we had to file a police report. And, everything had been out in the open. There was no silver covering the windows. You look in, here's the dispensary. It's downtown Vallejo. We have 9,000 patients. So this Gestapo tactics and the amount of the money that the city spent, which I think Matt has calculated over $600,000 to go nowhere, because all the charges against everyone was dismissed. It was hell. And with Matt, not only did they arrest him that once, they released him the next day. And then under cover of darkness, they went to a judge who they knew really was an opponent to cannabis and got him to sign this an additional search warrant for a property that they found after the fact. They rearrested him on this using this other law that really they only use for big-time coke dealers and everything. But what they didn't realize is while we were doing this, we were filming. We had National Geographic camera people with us filming all of this. And so now Matt has the only civil lawsuit moving against on a foundation of cannabis to ever be brought, a civil rights lawsuit to ever be moved forward, to ever be allowed to move forward against any municipality that we know of. But having said, and then after they rearrested him, they kept him in jail for 10 days. He got the shingles while he was in jail. It was hell for him. I mean, they kept him in just the worst conditions you can possibly imagine for about 10 days after rearresting him. So, I'm really happy that you guys didn't have to go through that, because it was really a nightmare. And the fact that we've stayed, sort of true to the movement is really a credit to Matt's endurance and ability to recover, and my belief that this is the very most important issue we have to tackle with humanity right now, is ending this prohibition and re-educating people on all the uses of cannabis. Like I started the show off with. So what are some of the could you share some other stories about patients that you've had in your dispensary that have touched your heart?
Oh man, gosh, all of them.
Well, I've met one man in particular who's a case study for lupus. He's lost half of a limb, and he's lost a lot of years of his life and hours of his life in fighting this lupus, which is becoming a fascinating new diagnosis, not new, but an expanding diagnosis, new knowledge. He's been using cannabis for a long, long time, and I've known a lot of other people with new diagnosis of lupus and the new diagnosis of other kinds of autoimmune diseases and the early treatment of cancer. We see that in dozens of patients pretty regularly. There's one man who produces a product called Richie Rolls, which is a coconut oil and other oils, CBD Tootsie Roll sort of a product. Excellent product. And then there's a CBD lotion company that's making a fantastic product. That's what we appreciate here is that even though we do a small scale, we see other small scale businesses and small scale consumers getting really good value. And that's what this is about. What it's about is not allowing the state and government to make it so expensive for no purpose. And we're glad that hasn't happened yet. We hope it doesn't happen. Patients need access to it, and people have to be able to determine how they're going to use it. And they need to have those rights. Those are people's rights.
Yeah.
Those are not state law enforcement prerogatives. So we really hope that it continues to gain momentum, to keep medical alive in the state of Washington. And that's a lot of what Hempapalooza is about.
Yeah, and I agree with you that there has to be, when I was in Colorado just now at the High Times Cannabis Cup back on 420, I did a bunch of sort of man on the street interviews, and I asked two questions. I asked one, what will the end of prohibition mean to end of cannabis prohibition mean to human civilization? And I got some amazing responses to that. Then I asked, if you could put in one word, and you know what? I'll ask you guys these questions too. Then I would ask a question. If you could put into one word, what does cannabis, marijuana, hemp mean to you? What would that be? Most common word given, freedom, which I found fascinating. But that was by a large majority freedom, and that's really what at the crux of what you're talking about here is our personal liberties, our personal freedom to decide on our own personal health without government interference, without the interference of pharmaceutical companies, without the interference of, unfortunately, many doctors who are bought and controlled by the pharmaceutical companies. And if people actually understood how the decisions are made to treat your illnesses, and in fact, a good film that has nothing to do with cannabis I recommend people watching that really will help you understand our medical industry is called Under Our Skin. It's about Lyme disease. There's a group of about 14 people that sit on a board that say, okay, we're going to allow this form of treatment for this disease. And if you're a doctor and you don't stick to those prescribed or allowed treatments, they will actually take you before a board and either fine you, suspend you, bar you entirely. And then once that happens, then you will be sued. And in the case of Lyme disease specifically, there will be other cures that will come. And I certainly know cannabis helps a lot of people. But right now, if you give people high doses of antibiotics over a period of time, you can end the disease. If you're a doctor and you do that, you will be sued for, first you'll lose your license, then you will be sued for millions of dollars, because what has to happen before a treatment's prescribed is they have to take a disease, the pharmaceutical industry, break it up into its individual genes and say, okay, I'm X pharmaceutical company, I own this part of this disease. I'm X pharmaceutical company over here, I own this part of the disease, and I've created my little medicine here with its 27 different side effects. And then now we're going to allow these treatments, which will probably make you sicker than the disease itself, to move forward. And that's in a nutshell roughly how our healthcare system is dysfunctioning these days. So anyway, let's talk real quickly about Hempapalooza, because we've got about 5 minutes left. Actually less than that, about 4 minutes left. And tell us about how this came together and how everyone can get involved and where people who want to become vendors and sponsors can reach you guys.
Cool. Well, as I said earlier, I used to live on the East Coast, and I used to travel the Interstate 70 from Maryland to West Virginia, and I'd always see this sign for Lollapalooza. And I never really thought much about it. And then one night I decided to look it up on the Urban Dictionary, and I looked it up, and it says Palooza meant ultimate party. And so then I had this affection for medical marijuana, and then as I studied more and learned more, that affection extended to hemp. Because, I mean, there's one thing to use marijuana for medical treatment and pain, but hemp is the only product you can genuinely live on around, no matter what. It's the only product you can genuinely live on, build with, clothe with, the whole 9 yards. So that's when I set hemp, and then Hempapalooza. So we did a farmer's market last year, just a medical marijuana farmer's market, and I decided to put the Hempapalooza name on the farmer's market. I wasn't really sure why or how, what I was doing with it, but we used the Hempapalooza name. We turned it into a little farmer's market. It was open to the public, but we were very careful that people understood that only medical patients could transact with medical vendors. But it was a great place for people we had a lot of grandparents bring their teenage grandchildren and talk about this. Let's just get the dialogue going. Stop being afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about a plant. I mean, that's silly. Be afraid to talk about guns. I promise. That's way scarier.
Oh no, we can talk about guns.
Hey, I still believe in the right to bear arms and ammo, which is a whole other issue. But so we started this, and it was such a great vibe last year that we decided to extend it, to move it so that we could get more people, and then to just really wrap it around this culture of hemp and marijuana. And that's basically what Hempapalooza is now, which is just a music and film festival. It's on the solstice, which is a universal holiday, and people can come out, we can talk about it, and the film, the music, everybody is just all about getting to know this plant. And I think it's going to be a great time, and I really encourage people to reach out to us if they'd like to participate in any way. Please reach out to us, because this is about spreading the knowledge and the passion and the love for the plant and the freedom, because you got me on freedom. And
that's hempapalooza.org. Hempapalooza, and that's HEMPAPALOOZA.org. And you can reach both Nathan and Nicole through that. Some of the guests, I know you guys you have Julius Melendez, 10-time Grammy winner, performing. Randy Hansen, who's been around forever doing Jimi Hendrix, which, how perfect that you're up in the Seattle area and you've got someone doing Jimi Hendrix. And then we're going to have some amazing films that are going to be showing, tons of activists. We mentioned Paul von Hartmann and Roger Christie. And this isn't just about medicinal and recreational, as Nicole touched on. This is about all the uses of the plant. I really appreciate you guys being on the show tonight, and I really, value your friendship and getting to know you guys over the past few months. And thank you guys for all you're doing, and thank you so much for sharing this just unbelievable story of what you went through, Nicole, because it's truly. I love stories where people had never had any interaction with the plant and had their life turned around by it. It's really phenomenal. So do you want to tell us what song you picked to play us out tonight?
The name of the song, I don't remember the name of the song. It's kind of a story. The girl emailed us on Hempapalooza, and she said, "Hey, check out my video." And I checked out the video, and I love this girl's vibe. I love the lyrics, and I apologize. I don't remember the name of the song.
It's a really cool song, and we'll be ending the show tonight with Addie Lane, All for One. And thank you, Nathan and Nicole. I really appreciate coming on the Just Love Show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kip.
The tools that paved our history seem to breathe in lies and selfish greed, and selling fear was key to protecting industry,
Not at all.
stopping anyone from questioning when all